Hey, it's Adas. Today we are going to have a conversation with ChatGPT. We're going to talk about how the Israeli justice system developed, and we'll go into some rabbit trails here because as ChatGPT shares information with us, what we find is it causes questions. Some of those questions I believe you're going to find to be fascinating. So, your coffee and let's talk about Israel's justice system, and then we'll look into some potential reasons why we're seeing such a clash with the Israel Judicial Reform bill that is on the table. All right, welcome to the backstory. Let's get started. So I asked ChatGPT, how did the Israel justice system develop? And that was based on an article that I read, AG Attacks Political and Judicial Reform Pressure on Legal System, Law Enforcement. That's the headline here, folks. There it is right there. So I read this and I said, we need some backstory on this. So I asked ChatGPT, how did the Israel justice system develop? ChatGPT comes back and says, the development of the Israel justice system is deeply intertwined with the establishment of the history of the State of Israel. Here's an overview of how it evolved. We're going to talk about three areas: the pre-state period, the establishment of the state, and then the establishment of the sources, the actual 5 sources that the Israeli legal system draws from, and then we'll go into the judiciary system. The pre-state period was pre-1948, and before the establishment of the State of Israel, the region was under Ottoman rule until 1948. It was about 600 years. It ended in 1917. It was followed by the British Mandate control until 1948, just over 30 years. And during these periods, the legal systems were based on the respective governing authorities. Ottoman law and Sharia law played a significant role during the Ottoman rule, while British Commonwealth law influenced the legal system during the Mandate period. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 on May 14th brought Israel's independence, right? That famous Declaration of Independence. And it was immediately followed by war with neighboring Arab countries. The very next day, the newly formed state had to address the establishment of its legal system amidst ongoing hostilities and internal challenges. The Israeli legal system draws its sources from, number 1, Jewish law, which is halakha. Jewish law has historical and cultural significance in Israel, and it influenced some areas of family law and religious matters. Secondly, you have British common law. During the British Mandate, the legal system was influenced by British common law, which helped shape aspects of Israel's legal framework. Then we have the Ottoman law. Certain elements of Ottoman law continue to have an impact on the legal system, especially concerning property rights and land tenure. And some of the biggest debates here in Israel are over property rights and land tenure. Then we have statutory law. Israel also adopted laws enacted by the British mandatory government and developed its own legislation through the Knesset, known as Israel's parliament. Then we have case law, which is precedent. As a legal system evolved, Israel's court system began to rely on previous decisions, precedents, to guide their judgments. Now we will talk about the judiciary. ChatGPT said the judiciary in Israel is an independent branch of government. The Supreme Court of Israel is the highest judicial authority in the country. It was established in 1948 and has played a significant role in shaping Israel's law throughout landmark decisions and interpretations of constitutional and civil rights matters. Now, when I read that ChatGPT wrote, the judiciary in Israel is an independent branch of government, I had red flags everywhere. And I doubt that even Israeli citizens understand the magnanimous implications of what ChatGPT wrote. The judiciary in Israel is an independent branch of government. When I read that, I had to ask a question. How can a government govern when it has a body outside of itself calling the shots. So let's bring that home. Let's say you have financial troubles and you decide you're going to look into debt consolidation. If you choose to have a third party either consolidate your debt or govern your financial matters until you're out of debt and you're able to get back on track, you lose sovereignty over the financial matters of your personal or your family life. You don't have control anymore. That is one of the scariest thoughts I think everybody faces when they're in debt, and that is that loss of sovereignty. You do get it back once you're out of debt. If you choose to take back control over your financial situation, then you are able to restore sovereignty. I know that's a personal level of understanding this, but when you look at the fact that a branch of government may be part of the government, but it's independent of the government, that is saying that we are calling the shots on sovereignty. And this is one of the core, undiscussed issues behind the judicial reform. That question led me to ask ChatGPT another question. You said the Supreme Court of Israel is an independent branch of government. Does that mean it is not a branch of the government? And how does it differ from the three branches of the U.S. government? ChatGPT comes back and says, apologies for any confusion caused by my wording. To clarify, the Supreme Court of Israel is indeed a branch of the Israeli government, but it operates independently within the structure of the government. It has just said the same thing in two different ways. Whether it is a governing body outside of the government or it is an independent governing body not accountable to the government inside the body is one in the same. This should give everyone listening, especially those that are in Israel, a big question mark, asking, whoa, what is the judicial reform really about? So ChatGPT says, in Israel, the government is divided into three branches. Legislative branch. This is the Knesset, which serves as the parliament of Israel. It is responsible for enacting laws, scrutinizing the government, and representing the public. Nachon. Executive branch. The executive branch is headed by the prime minister, who is the head of the government, and the president, who is the head of state. The executive branch is responsible for implementing and enforcing laws, conducting foreign affairs, and managing the government. The judicial branch. The judicial branch is composed of Israel's independent court system with the Supreme Court at its apex. The Supreme Court of Israel operates separately from the legislative and executive branches and is responsible for interpreting laws, ensuring their constitutionality, and adjudicating disputes. The court plays a vital role in upholding the rule of law and protecting individual rights. The primary distinction between the three branches of the U.S. government and the structure in Israel lies in the specific design of allocating powers. Separation of powers. The U.S. government follows a principle of separation of powers, where the legislative, executive, and judicial branches are distinct and have separate functions and authorities. Each branch acts as a check on the other. Let me say that again. Each branch acts as a check on the others to prevent an excessive concentration of power. Many of you are probably thinking, what's happening now in the U.S. government? Another video, and we will talk about it. Checks and balances. In the U.S. system, the three branches have the ability to check each other's powers and balance their actions. For example, the president can veto legislation passed by the Congress, but the Congress can override the veto with a 2/3 majority. The judicial branch can also review the constitutionality of laws and executive actions. So everybody can get involved with the process, and yet the checks and balances keep them from creating laws that put distinct power into the hands of the other. Now, let's move on. The federal system. The U.S. has a federal system of government the United States started with the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Anti-Federalists wanted a strong central government, and the Federalists wanted a smaller central government with a lot of the governing powers existing within the states themselves. So we still have this contention between anti-federalists and federalists in America. If you go through the history of America, you will find this struggle between the anti-federalist view, bigger, larger government control, or the federalist view, smaller government control, more power given to the state. Now, let's go back to the federal system. The U.S. has a federal system of government with powers divided between the federal government and the individual state governments. Each state has its own court system, and state supreme courts also play essential roles in interpreting state laws and upholding state constitutions. We chose the federal system, and for better or for worse, it is by far still the best system in the United States, although the current government of the United States doesn't see it that way. In contrast, Israel operates with a parliamentary system of government where the prime minister is typically the head of the ruling or coalition in the Knesset. There is no separate election for the prime minister as in the U.S. presidential system. Israel does not have a formal system of checks and balances like that of the United States, but relies on the concept of responsible government in which the executive is accountable to the legislative branch. Now notice that no one is accountable to the judicial branch or vice versa. Everything that can represent accountability exists only within the legislative and executive branch of Israel. Overall, while Israel and the United States have three branches of government, their specific structure, powers, and methods of operation differ due to variations in the respective political systems and constitutional design. Now, ChatGPT stopped here. And when ChatGPT stops without finishing a word or a period or just hanging in the middle of a sentence, you always have to tell it, I don't think you're finished. And I said, I don't think you're finished. I clicked send and it responded, I apologize for any confusion. You're correct. It seems my response was cut off prematurely. Allow me to continue. To further elaborate on the differences between the three branches of the U.S. government and the structure in Israel. Now, I'm going to go through these. However, I want you to know why it is important that we continue this conversation. First, it's important if you made Aliyah from the United States and you are now looking at the protests in the country and the Judicial Reform bill from what we would call an Anglo perspective, or from how things are governed in the United States, then it becomes very frustrating. Or you have a wrong premise when you are stating your position regarding this judicial reform. So that's why this conversation, even with ChatGPT, becomes very important. We need to know and understand what are the differences so we can formulate our opinions appropriately from the right premise. So here we go. To further elaborate on the differences between the three branches of the U.S. government and the structure in Israel, we have the role of the head of state. In the United States, the president serves as both the head of government and the head of state. This means that the president is the chief executive and also represents the country symbolically. In Israel, the roles of the head of government, prime minister, and the head of the state, president, are separated. The president of Israel serves as a ceremonial figurehead, while the prime minister is the head of the government and holds executive powers. Now, if these two, the president and the prime minister, are at odds over issues that are evolving or presenting themselves in the state itself, and both are in contact with the president of the United States, there can be a conflict of interest. So, in light of President Herzog's recent visit to the United States and the discussion over the reform bill, and the fact that prior to Herzog's visit to the United States, Biden calls Prime Minister Netanyahu, which was a very smart move on Biden's part because he knew that what he was doing by inviting Herzog was going to cause problems. First of all, the way Netanyahu handles this and agrees to discuss this with the president was so brilliant on Netanyahu's part. That's the one thing about Prime Minister Netanyahu. He really understands the issues, and he understands how those that are more left will use negotiating powers with foreign powers, i.e. the United States or the EU, to try and move an issue that's taking place in Israel in a certain direction. So how the Prime Minister handles this is very important. He can either further isolate or he can engage. And Netanyahu has never been known as one who isolates. He's a master negotiator. He does not shy away from the issues. So immediately, even before Herzog went to America, which was this past week, we find that Netanyahu is preempting something by allowing himself to be in the mix. Let's go on. So that was about the role of the head of state. Now we're going to talk about words that you may not hear often or have never heard. Bicameral versus unicameral legislature. So what is bicameral? The U.S. Congress is bicameral. That means it consists of two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Israel's legislature, the Knesset, is unicameral. That means it has a single chamber. Then we have judicial review. Both the U.S. Supreme Court and the Supreme Court of Israel have the power of judicial review, allowing them to interpret laws, review their constitutionality, and ensure that they align with the respective country's constitution. However, the role and extent of judicial review might differ between the two courts due to the different legal and constitutional systems. Federal versus unitary system. The United States is a federal system with powers divided between the federal government and individual states, each with its own court system and laws. Israel, on the other hand, operates a unitary system where power is concentrated at the national level and the court system applies to the entire country. Selection of judges. In the U.S., federal judges, including Supreme Court justices, are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. In Israel, judges, including those on the Supreme Court, are selected by a judicial selection committee, which includes representatives from the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, as well as legal professionals. Now, this right here, selection of judges, is part of the issue that's being contended for in the Judicial Reform bill. So the summary of ChatGPT to that question was, while both the U.S. and Israel have three branches of government, their structures, powers, and functions vary due to the different political systems, legal traditions, and historical context in which they operate. The U.S. system emphasizes a strong separation of powers with checks and balances. Until the Biden administration. Or maybe that was the Obama one. Okay, we'll see. Even Trump had his little overreach there. Okay. Well, Israel's parliamentary system centers on a fusion of executive and legislative branches with the judiciary as a separate, independent entity. So that is the end of the conversation that ChatGPT and I had over my questions concerning the statement that said the judiciary in Israel is an independent branch of government. So let's move on to the next part of our conversation with ChatGPT over how the judiciary operates in Israel. Let's look at the legal development and challenges. Over the years, Israel's legal system has faced numerous challenges related to issues such as national security, territorial disputes, religious versus secular matters, and the rights of minorities. These challenges have often been addressed through the legal system, leading to the evolution of Israel's jurisprudence. So here we are. That brings us to the rule of law. Israel upholds the principle of the rule of law, which means that all individuals and entities, including the government itself, are subject to the law. This principle helps maintain the balance of power and ensures equal treatment under the law. It's important to note that the development of Israel's justice system is an ongoing process shaped by historical, cultural, and political factors. As the state of Israel continues to evolve, its legal system will likely continue to adapt and respond to new challenges and developments. Now, that led me to ask another question, and we'll talk about that question in the next segment of this fascinating conversation I had with ChatGPT. We're going to talk about the rule of law. What does it mean? How much of Israel's law is influenced by international law? So that's a wrap for today on the backstory. It's Adas. I look forward to seeing you in our next segment. Shalom.